Stanley.
Say good morning.
Good morning.
Could you explain to the jurors how you are currently employed?
Currently I'm retired as of July this year.
And prior to July of this year, well, congratulations, one. And
Thank you.
prior to July of this year, can you tell the jurors how you were employed or where?
Yes, I was an associate medical examiner with the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office.
And can you tell the jurors how long were you an associate medical examiner with the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office?
I began at Fulton County as a locum tenens or contract medical examiner in March of 2020 and was hired full-time in July of 2022.
And prior to beginning your contract work in March of 2020 with Fulton County, can you tell the jurors, were you employed by other medical examiners, agencies in other counties?
Yes, I was a regional medical examiner with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation from July of 2000 to December of 2019.
Now, can you tell the jurors a little bit about your educational background and training that has allowed you to work as a medical examiner for all these years?
I obtained a Bachelor of Science degree from Emory University, a medical degree from the Medical College of Georgia. I did a one-year internship in internal medicine, also at the Medical College of Georgia. I then completed an anatomic and clinical pathology residency, followed by one-year fellowship in forensic pathology at the Medical University of South Carolina.
And can you tell the jurors, in your number of years working in various medical examiners, agencies or offices, approximately how many autopsies have you performed?
Greater than 3,500.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would tender Dr. Stanley as an expert in forensic pathology.
She is so qualified and may testify as an expert in that field.
Thank you, Judge. Now, Dr. Stanley, can you tell the jurors generally when you are preparing to begin an autopsy, some of the first steps that you take before actually beginning the autopsy?
Yes, every medical examiner's office has a staff of medical examiner investigators. So the coroner, if it's a certain county, or law enforcement will contact the medical examiner's investigators to discuss a death. If that death falls within the jurisdiction of a medical examiner's office, then the case is accepted into that office. Cases which fall under the Georgia Death Investigation Act to be autopsied by medical examiner's offices are unnatural or unexpected deaths, unnatural being homicide, suicide, accident. However, every medical examiner's office gets a fair number of natural deaths, drug-related deaths. It's just that they may be in the unexpected category.
Okay, and can you tell the jurors, while working at the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office, was it a part of the normal procedures and practices for an autopsy to be documented with photographs?
Yes.
And as you do the procedures with the external and internal portions of the autopsy, are you having someone, I guess, take your notes of your findings and conclusions?
I take notes during the autopsy and then dictate the autopsy afterwards to be transcribed.
Okay, and are your findings and conclusions then memorialized in a report?
Yes, they are.
And is that something you did for every autopsy that you performed while working with the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay. Now, I want to direct your attention to March 17th of 2022. Did you have the occasion to perform an autopsy on a gentleman named Shymel Drinks?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, as it relates to the autopsy of Mr. Drinks, were the policies and procedures that you just described completed? And I mean, were photographs taken and was a report created?
Yes.
Okay. And I want to show you what's been marked as state's exhibits. Mr. Weinstein. I want to show you what's been marked as state's exhibits 126 through 161, and then state's exhibit 162, Victor Victor.
Okay, this just seems cumulative. That's a lot of pages.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Stanley, in your review of state's exhibits, we'll start with 126 VV through 161 VV. Do you recognize the photographs contained in those exhibits?
I do.
And can you tell the jurors how you recognize those photographs?
They are photographs which were taken during the course of the autopsy.
Okay. And are those photographs in state's exhibits 126 VV through 161 VV? Are they fair and accurate copies of the photographs taken during the March 17, 2022 autopsy of Mr. Drinks?
Yes, sir.
And I want to move to state's exhibit 162 VV. Can you tell the jurors, do you recognize that exhibit?
I do.
And how do you recognize it?
It is a copy of my autopsy report.
Okay. And is state's exhibit 162 VV, is it a fair and accurate copy of the autopsy report that you created for the autopsy that you did on Mr. Drinks on March 17th of 2022?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would tender what's been marked as state's exhibit 126 VV through 162 VV.
Through, Your Honor, for 126 to 161, no objection. 162, I don't have an objection for admitting it for the record. I guess it's a report.
Okay, well, those are all admitted. And in terms of what goes out, we'll sort that out later.
Now, Dr. Stanley, can you explain to the jurors when you began the autopsy procedure on Mr. Drinks on March 17th, can you tell the jurors what you did first to kind of initiate your process as it related to the autopsy?
Yes. Before any autopsy, the investigative information, which is written up by the investigator, is reviewed. I always say an autopsy is never performed in a vacuum. You always have the investigative information first, and then a further investigative information or medical history is needed that's requested by the medical examiner. So in this case, as there were gunshot wounds, X-rays were taken of Mr. Drinks. Before the autopsy, every medical examiner's office has the capability to perform X-rays. In this case, it's because if there are bullets in the body, the location needs to be determined and they need to be recovered at autopsy. After that, the external examination is performed, documenting everything from hair color, eye color, scars, tattoos, trauma, obviously, if trauma is present, and then the internal examination is performed.
Okay, and I want to show you it should pop up on the screen before you, states exhibits 127 BV and 129 BV. Now, Dr. Stanley, can you explain to the jurors, I guess, the purpose of this photograph that is taken during the autopsy procedure?
This is a facial identification photograph. You will notice in every photograph there is the unique identifying case number for this autopsy and for every piece of evidence which is associated with this autopsy.
Okay, and in State Exhibit 129, can you tell the jurors, is this the state in which Mr. Drink's body was received by the medical examiner's office?
Yes. Everyone is received within a sealed and labeled body bag. Once that body bag is opened, photographs are taken along the way as an extra step of documentation. So this is a photograph of how Mr. Drinks was received. The white paper bags on the hands are placed on the hands, typically by law enforcement at the scene for preservation of possible evidence.
Okay, and can you tell the jurors, in your, I guess, when you began the external review of Mr. Drinks, can you tell the jurors, did you notice, as it relates to the injuries, anything like soot or stippling?
No. However, there was what's called pseudo stippling or false stippling associated with the entrance gunshot wound of his neck.
Okay, can you explain to the jurors what is pseudo stippling and how is that created?
Yes. Well, first, soot is the combustion of gunpowder, which is associated with contact or near contact gunshot wounds. Gunpowder stippling refers to the burning and unburned grains of gunpowder, which can impact on the skin around an entrance gunshot wound. They look like red pinpoint, very small abrasions. This is characteristic of close range or intermediate range gunshot wounds. In this case, the investigative information and the scene findings I had was that Mr. Drinks was found deceased within a vehicle, and that there were gunshot wound defects noted in the car doors, the front door, the front driver's door, the front passenger door, as well as the front passenger's windshield. So he had what's called pseudo stippling, so it's not gunpowder stippling, but there were larger irregular abrasions which were associated with the entrance gunshot wound of the neck. So what that tells you is, in conjunction with the scene findings, that when a bullet passes through an intermediary target, say the bullet passes through a wall or a window prior to striking the victim, that can fragment the bullet, and those bullet fragments can impact on the skin around the entrance wound, or it can fragment the intermediary object itself, the door, the window. So those fragments can impact. So there were those irregular fragments of either the intermediary target or the projectile around the entrance wound of the neck.
And the irregularly, can't say that word this morning, the irregular, the things that you found to be not normal, I guess. My mouth is not going to say that word today. Can you tell us, in State's Exhibit 138 BB, can you point out to the jury what you are talking about as it relates to the pseudo stippling?
Yes, it's easier to see on what's termed the clean photograph. Photographs of wounds are taken before cleaning the body and after.
Yes.
But
145 BV, if that will help assist.
Yes, if you can look at the top of the photograph, when we see the outline of his mandible or his lower jaw, I think you can appreciate there are some irregular red or dark areas that are associated around his mandible. And also around the, termed the mastoid process, this bump that you feel at the base of the skull. So those are characteristic of what's called pseudo-stippling. So they're fragments of the intermediary target.
Now, can you tell the jurors, how does that affect your ability to determine, I guess, the range of fire, or how far a barrel of a gun is from the gunshot wound that we're looking at here in State's Exhibit 145, Victor Victor?
Well, once a projectile has passed through an intermediary target before striking the victim, the medical examiner is not able to determine that distance. Say if there is the shooter, a door, and the victim, the medical examiner is not able to determine whether the shot was fired immediately next to the door or 30 feet, 50 feet, or more away from the door. So it's termed indeterminate range. In other words, you don't know the range of fire through an intermediary target. So this was indeterminate range through an intermediary target. That's the range of fire.
So the findings that you just talked about, are they consistent with someone being shot while in a vehicle?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you talked about in State's Exhibit 145 BV that this wound on the neck was an entrance wound. Can you tell the jurors, is there an exit wound associated with this injury, this shot to the neck?
There was not. The bullet was retained within the body.
Okay, and I should have asked you this first. In the exhibit we're looking at in 145 BV, can you tell the jurors what side of Mr. Drink's body is this gunshot wound to the neck?
This is the right side of the neck.
This would be the side that's, I guess, closest to, if you're sitting in the driver's seat of a vehicle, to the passenger, I guess, compartment.
Correct, yes.
Now, can you tell the jurors, if there is no exit wound, can you explain to the jurors, were you able to determine during the external and internal portions of the autopsy that you performed, the pathway of travel of the projectile or bullet through Mr. Drink's neck and into his body?
Yes, the bullet entered the right side of the neck. It was going upward, in other words, towards the top of Mr. Drink's head and to his left. So the bullet passed through the soft tissue of the neck and impacted the base of the skull, fractured the base of the skull, and caused bleeding within the brain case, and also caused a small laceration of the base of the brain.
Now, Doctor, can you explain to the jurors when someone receives a traumatic injury like this, and you said it goes through Mr. Drink's neck, it fractures the base of his skull, and does it travel upward?
Yes, it was traveling upward.
Okay. The areas of the brain that you just described, that the pathway of travel is for the projectile, can you tell the jury what areas of the brain is affected, and what motor skills does it affect as it relates to someone who is shot in this manner?
Well, in this case, the bullet fracturing the base of the skull, this represents a massive injury to the skull and also to the brain. It caused bleeding on the surface and within the brain. And whenever there is massive trauma such as this to the brain, consciousness is lost immediately. However, I could not determine whether this shot was instantly fatal or if Mr. Drink still had some cardiac and respiratory activity for some undetermined period of time. The sometimes with these catastrophic injuries to the brain can send out a signal to the heart, which causes the heart to either stop beating immediately or to go into a lethal rhythm. So consciousness would have been lost immediately, but whether death was instantaneous or there was some cardiac activity or breathing activity for some period of time, I couldn't determine.
And can you explain to the jury, based on the circumstances you kind of just described, what does, I know you described what the brain, the message that is sent to the heart. Can you explain to the jurors, are there other things that the body does under these circumstances? And I mean, are there any involuntary actions that the body can produce as it relates to someone who was shot in this manner?
Well, if there was still cardiac and respiratory activity, then there could have been obviously breathing. As people are dying, they can exhibit abnormal patterns of breathing. So I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to.
And I guess I'll give you an example. In an instance where someone is shot like this, and can someone's hands clench and it remain clenched because of the immediate traumatic injury that they received to their brain?
It's possible, yes.
Now, as it relates to the
Vice's
direction
raid.
of travel, if Mr. Drink's head is tilted to the left and he's shot from the right side through the passenger door, would that be consistent with, I guess, why the projectile would travel upward?
Yes. And just a clarification, when I talk of the direction of the bullet, that means the direction of the bullet once it enters the body. I'm not able to determine direction of the position of the gun or the shooter from that.
Okay.
I need a
And so
diagram.
the bullet, it enters the right side of his neck. It travels upward. Can you explain to the jurors where the bullet ended within the head cavity of Mr. Drinks?
Yes, the bullet was recovered within the fractured base of the skull.
All right, I'm gonna pause here because we still don't know who the heck Barter is. We don't have videos of this moment. We just have a still image that's capturing the license plate reader thing. So if you ask me, if I'm unsuspected and driving at a light, unless the other car is rolling down their window and goes, "Hey buddy, I'm about to unalive you," well, how would I know to duck? Unless, the first shot, if I can react quickly enough, maybe I'm trying to veer away from where the noise is coming from, and that gives me the angle. Versus if I know somebody, because you guys are saying in the chat, maybe somebody was in the car with him. Who's this Barter person? If I know somebody's coming up on me and not just unsuspected shooting from another car window without me knowing, maybe that would explain why I'm already trying to maneuver out of the way in a split second. I have questions here. I have questions.
Okay. Can you explain to the jurors, as you continued the autopsy, were there any other injuries associated with a gunshot wound?
Yes. Mr. Drinks had a gunshot wound pathway through the upper portion of his right forearm. It entered what's referred to as the back or the dorsal aspect of the forearm. The bullet passed through the soft tissue of the forearm and then exited the ventral or inside surface of the right forearm.
And in the exhibit that we're looking at in front of you states that 140 VV. Is that the entrance wound that you just described as it relates to the shot that he received in his forearm?
Yes, that is the entrance wound.
Now, I want to show you State's Exhibit 142 VV. I know you just described kind of the travel or the pathway of travel of the bullet. In this exhibit, 142, Victor, is this the exit wound that you just described?
Yes, it is.
Now, can you explain to the jurors how you're able to determine which is an entry wound and which is an exit wound based on your training and your number of years of experience?
In general, entrance gunshot wounds have a more round, regular appearance. Typically, entrance gunshot wounds have what's called an abrasion border. This means as the bullet pierces the skin, it abrades or scrapes off a thin border of the skin around the wound. Exit gunshot wounds typically have a more irregular appearance. They typically do not have abrasion borders, but there can be exceptions.
And in State Exhibit 141 VV, the abrasion border that you're describing, is that what's in the middle of, I guess, State Exhibit 141 VV, the darker colored area around the gunshot wound?
No, that's more of the flap of skin.
So you're the doctor, I'll let you do it.
This entrance gunshot wound was larger than normal. It was ½ an inch. The entrance gunshot wound of the neck was about 2/10 or 3/10 of an inch. So because this entrance gunshot wound was round, it was larger and more
Don't
irregular.
look at the screen if you're queasy.
That was
My
also
bad.
consistent with this projectile also passing through an intermediary target. The abrasion border was slightly more irregular. So here we see this is a dark abrasion. There's also a thinner rim of dark abrasion on this side of the entrance gunshot wound. This represents a laceration or tear of the skin. And then this area is just somewhat of an irregular flap of skin.
Okay, and then I'm going to bring back up States 142 VV. Can you explain to the jurors the difference in the exit wound that we're seeing here as it relates to the entry wound, and how you are able to make your determinations?
Yes, this is an exit wound. Exit wounds can either look like multiple lacerations or tears of the skin, but one of the characteristics of exit gunshot wounds is that you can reapproximate the skin edges, and that exit gunshot wounds typically do not have an abrasion border. So there's no abrasion border associated with this wound, and it was very easy to reapproximate the skin edges.
Thank you very much. Now, as a part of the autopsy that you performed, I want to show you States Exhibit 147 VV and 148 VV. Can you explain to the jurors, I guess, the analysis that you did as it relates to the jacket that Mr. Drinks had on when he was shot?
Yes, for homicide cases, photographs of the clothing are always made, and then photographs are taken to determine if there are defects in the clothing which seem to correspond with the gunshot wounds.
And when you're examining the clothing of a victim who's been shot, do you look for soot, like you talked about earlier, to help you make a determination as it relates to range of fire?
Yes.
Okay. Now, lastly, I want to show you States Exhibit 161 VV. And you described at the beginning of your autopsy that x-rays are always taken, as well as the fact that you, during the autopsy, were able to remove a projectile from I think you said the base of the fractures of the skull of Mr. Drinks. Is that correct?
Yes.
And in States Exhibit 161 VV, is this the projectile that you removed?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And because my medical terminology is limited, can you explain to the jurors? You said you removed it from the base of the skull fractures. Where is that?
Yes, I actually removed it from the occipital skull. The occipital skull forms the lower back portion of the skull, but also the back half of the base of the skull. I wrote sphenoid skull, which is a portion of the skull which is in the central base of the skull, and that was a mistake, and I noted it in the report. It was recovered from the occipital skull, not the sphenoid skull.
And in 146 VV, can you orient the jurors? I guess, do you see, I guess, the general area where the projectile would have been removed? Is it contained in that photograph, like the base of the skull?
No, that photograph was just to document whether there were injuries behind the right ear.
So I'm going to have you, I guess, show on me, where would the bullet have been removed as it relates to the base of Mr. Drink's skull?
The bullet would have been removed from, it's difficult to point because it would have been, if we think of the base of the skull, it would have been inside, below the skull base, somewhat on the right side.
Okay. Is it near the knot that you described earlier? On the other side?
It would have been internal to that, yes.
And can you tell the jurors, once you removed the projectile and placed it in the clear box with it being labeled, what do you do with it next?
It is then submitted as evidence to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation.
Now, as a part of your autopsy procedures, can you tell the jurors what your determination was as it relates to the cause of death of Mr. Drinks?
Yes, I stated that the cause of death was multiple gunshot wounds.
And as it relates to your determination of the manner of death of Mr. Drinks, can you explain to the jurors what your determination was?
Yes, for the purposes of a medical examiner, if the actions of another individual cause or contribute to the death, then the manner is classified as a homicide.
Your Honor, I have nothing further at this time.
All right, are there questions? Go ahead.
All right, this is going to be interesting, I think. Could be short, but interesting.
Doctor, good morning. My name is Max Shard. I represent Shannon Stillwell, okay?
Yes, sir.
And Ms. Stillwell is seated right over here. So I want to ask you about this concept of stippling and pseudo-stippling first, okay? Now, you're not saying that stippling is involved in this case, you're saying pseudo-stippling,
Yes.
which could have been caused by the projectile fragmenting and the low pieces embedding in or affecting Mr. Drinks' skin, or low pieces of the intermediate object, perhaps a window or something like that.
Or door, yes, sir.
Okay. And I'm not talking about the pseudo-stippling that you found in this case. I'm just talking in general when we're talking about stippling. I just want to clarify something. Stippling, you're saying, is caused by burns around a gunshot wound when it's a close and range shot.
Yes. When one says stippling, it typically means gunpowder stippling, but yes, that's correct.
Okay, and you're saying gunpowder stippling, and that's just what I want to clarify. The stippling is caused by gunpowder soot that is ejected out the barrel of the gun and would affect the skin of the unfortunate decedent, correct?
Yes, gunpowder stippling represents the burning and unburned grains of gunpowder, which exit the barrel and can impact on the skin in a close-range gunshot wound.
Okay, and I know you're not an expert in gunshot residue testing or anything like that, but I just want to clarify. These are two different concepts, correct?
That's correct.
Gunpowder stippling and then gunshot residue testing, where you would test an area or a specific object for the presence of gunshot residue. Those are two separate concepts, both involving gunshot residue.
Well, the determination of gunpowder stippling at autopsy, yes, is done by the medical examiner.
Right,
Yes.
okay. Now, in this case, as I understand, there were two gunshot wounds that you observed.
Yes,
Okay. One to the arm, to the forearm, and one to the neck.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. The lethal wound was the wound to the neck.
That's correct.
Okay. And as the medical examiner, you do not know what order those two shots occurred.
That is correct. I do not know
Okay,
the
so
order.
Mr. Drinks could have been shot in the arm first or in the neck first.
That's correct.
Okay. And I want to talk specifically about the lethal wound to the neck. Okay? You talked and used medical terms, and it sounds like there was massive injury to the base of the brain, among other things.
The skull and the brain, yes, sir.
Okay. And you testified, to my understanding, that the ability to consciously control one's body would be immediately lost.
That's correct.
Okay. Death may not be immediate, but the ability to move body parts, to open a door, to move your feet up and down, things of that nature would be immediately lost.
Yes, conscious movement would have been immediately lost. Yes.
Okay, and we're not talking about within a minute, we're talking about immediate because of the severance of the, because the base of the brain was
Because of the
severed.
massive damage to the skull and the brain, yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Anything, Mr. Johnson? Okay, any redirect?
Very brief. Dr. Stanley, if, after receiving a gunshot wound to the neck, as Mr. Drinks did, and prior to being shot, he had his foot compressed on the brake, is it
Panic.
possible, is it consistent with the fact, would his foot remain on the brake? Is that possible?
After sustaining the gunshot wound to the neck?
Yes.
Yes, that's possible. Yes.
Now, you said earlier that the direction of travel was upward. Can you explain to the jury, was it upward to the left, upward to the right? Can you explain that?
Yes, again, this direction is simply from the time that the bullet enters the body. It went towards his head, which is upward, and towards his left, upward and to the left.
And I want to ask you one last question. When someone is shot, would you expect to find gunshot residue on that person?
Not necessarily.
Okay. I don't have anything further on.
Doctor, Mr. Abadi just asked, after being shot in the neck in the way that Mr. Drinks was, unfortunately, whether it's possible that one's foot could remain on a brake if it was already there. And you said that's possible.
Yes, sir.
Okay. What is not possible, you would agree it's not possible after suffering that wound that someone would be actively moving their feet up and down off the brake. That would not be possible, would it?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you for your time, and you are excused.
Yes,
Along
thank
to your
you.
next witness.